Okay, why don't we introduce, let everybody kind of introduce themselves, the members of the committee. I know this is, I'm Alan Peach, co-chair of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Study Committee, which was created by SR 981 to study whether there's a need for medical cannabis legislation in Georgia. My co-chair is Senator Renee Underman. She'll be here and be a few minutes late. We realize that this particular issue has a lot of passion around it and a lot of diverse opinion, a lot of diverse attitudes about the approach here. So we've attempted to learn from the 4 previous hearings. We've heard from law enforcement, we've heard from the medical community, and we've heard from citizens who have different diagnoses who believe they could benefit from medical cannabis, and it has been a very good effort. Let's see. So let's while we're here, Representative Kaiser, why don't you just introduce yourself, who you represent, and whatever you'd like to say for just a minute or so.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Kaiser. My microphone's
on.
Have a loud
You are now.
I represent House District 59, which is the city of Atlanta and part of the city of East Point. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say a special hello to someone who is a high school student who's been following this case very closely, Kaylee Ann Teasley, if you just say hello. And Kaylee Ann's studying the issue very closely and has made most of the meetings and made it to Augusta last time. So we're happy to have you here. Thanks,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Golick. Sorry. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rich Golick. I'm about to start my 9th term in the House of Representatives. I represent Vinings, Smyrna, part of Mableton, and a part of North Atlanta. I also chair the committee called the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, and that's the committee in the House of Representatives that handles all criminal law matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Golick. Senator Miller.
The lone senator.
The lone senator.
Not for long, I'm sure. Not for long. My name is Butch Miller, and I represent the 49th District, which for the most part includes Hall County. And I have the distinct honor of having my constituents here today, and I appreciate it very much. And am I mistaken, but do we have a birthday in the house today? Dr. Smith, is it your birthday? 29 and holding? What's that? How about a happy birthday?
Hey, yeah, happy birthday there, Dr. Smith.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it. And this is, as Representative Peake mentioned, a very passionate issue, and it's a very important issue to a lot of people. And we need to make sure that we are deliberative and very reasoned in our method and in our progress to move forward, in our efforts to move forward. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Representative Gravely. Yes. Have we not got a get right here? We got a portable one down there? No.
I'm Representative Micah Gravely. Served in the House for my first term. This last year was reelected for a second term. Served House District 67, which is Douglas and Paulding County. And I'm very happy to welcome a little girl here today from Dallas, Georgia, who has served as one of the main motivating factors in my life, who has helped change my life in regard to this issue. Little Sydney Wages in the back, and her mother and father, Jimmy and Lisa Wages. Happy that they're here.
And last but not least, Chuck Spahos. You want to
yes,
tell us who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, Chuck Spahos. I'm the director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, and I'm here on behalf of the DA's Association and Solicitors Association as well.
Thank you, Chuck. Dr. Matthews Gwynn is also our appointment from MAG. He is not here today. Also, Senator Unterman and Senator Thompson and Senator Burke. I think we'll all be here at some point. Let's talk through the agenda for the committee real quick. We've got 2 folks presenting today. Dr. James Smith, we'll introduce him in a minute, and also Mr. Rick Allen. Is Rick here? Yeah. Okay, good. Good to see you. Feeling okay? Good. And then we're going to have a summary presentation of findings from the staff, and then we're going to give each member an opportunity to have a final wrap-up statement, probably 5 minutes max, and then Senator Underman and I will have our closing remarks as well too. So let's get started. Our first presenter, Dr. Smith, if you want to come on, start heading up to the podium. Dr. James Smith, who's a former member of Medical Association of Georgia. He's a Georgia physician. He's here today with his wife, Courtney. They have moved their family to Colorado so their daughter can have access to cannabis oil. So he's got a unique perspective, not only as a physician, but also as a father of a beautiful little girl. And so, and Dr. Smith and his wife both made the effort, left their kids in Colorado, 5 of them, to come be here with us today. So thank you for making the effort to do that. And yeah.
I saw the look of some concerned
faces. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. So we're glad to have you here. Appreciate you making the effort, and the floor is yours.
Chairman Peak, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today. As he said, my name is James Smith. I am an emergency physician in Georgia, but I come to you today not as a physician to lecture you on the science of seizure treatment with cannabis oil, but as a desperate father, actually begging you to help save the life of my daughter, reunite my family, and do the same for other Georgia families. I'm not going to bore you with more research study facts and figures. I want to give you a firsthand account of how in just a matter of months, a cannabis oil treatment has already made massive progress in restoring our daughter and controlling her seizures. Until May of 2013, Marlo, then at age 6, had enjoyed a completely normal childhood and development. In actuality, she excelled in school and competitive gymnastics and was always the center of any social event. Within a month of the onset of her seizures, all of that was stolen from her. We watched helplessly as her body was battered by the drop seizures, and while the pharmaceutical medications increasingly turned her into a zombie. We were fortunate enough to have some of the greatest minds in the field of pediatric epilepsy to evaluate and treat her. We even traveled to Harvard's Boston Children's Hospital for her to be evaluated by several of the world's authorities on her disorder. Unfortunately, though, their answer and subsequent answers was always the same. They didn't know what was causing the seizures, and no treatment existed with any significant success. When we moved to Colorado, she was on a maximum dose of 3 very strong pharmaceutical anti-seizure medications and had previously failed treatment with 2 other pharmaceutical drugs, as well as failing treatment with high-dose Valium, high-dose steroids, and something called the ketogenic diet. These treatments caused a cornucopia of nasty side effects, and yet she was continuing to have increasing frequency of atonic, or otherwise known as drop seizures. These seizures caused her to almost instantaneously lose all muscle tone and fall wherever she is, striking whatever is around or below her. If we were lucky, it was simply a new bruise to an arm, a leg, or her torso. But often it was a black eye, a busted tooth, or a new cut to repair. Before treatment with the cannabis oil, on an average day, we knew there would be 20 to 30 of these seizures. On a bad day, we just quit counting. Our hope died a little with each treatment failure. When we learned of the success in Colorado with the cannabis oil, our hope was renewed. At this point, we prayed and decided as a family that we had to do whatever it took to try and save our daughter, even if that meant uprooting and splitting up our family by moving to Colorado. As a physician, I took an oath to do no harm, but as a father, I'm bound to a much more sacred, unspoken oath, to do anything and everything I can to protect and provide for my child. Not only do I believe that I am upholding my oath as a physician, but I believe by giving my daughter this oil that I am fulfilling my oath as a father by providing a treatment that is saving and restoring her quality of life and quite possibly healing her. Now, after just 5 months of treatment with the cannabis oil, she will often go several days with no drop seizures at all. And on a bad day, we will have 1 or 2. Not only that, but we have been able to completely wean her off one of her pharmaceutical medications and have seen dramatic improvement in the mind-altering side effects of that medication that we had previously endured. After we had tried virtually every treatment that modern Western medicine had to offer, imagine my surprise as an American-trained and boarded physician and a previous researcher that an all-natural plant extract was the first thing to show any substantial and prolonged improvement in the treatment of her seizures. We are finally seeing true control of her seizures with a cannabis oil that is high in cannabidiol and very low in THC. It is working, and it is the only thing that has worked. Unfortunately, I have heard many Georgians hide behind the statements, "We need more research," or "It's a slippery slope." I do not disagree that we need more research, but this is not a sound argument to deny a life-saving treatment. Georgia could and should be on the forefront of this research and not idly sitting by. As for fear of the slippery slope, I believe that in legislation, a slope is only as slippery as you allow it to be, and fear should never prevent a just action. This committee in the legislature has the power, the knowledge, and the experience to pass legislation that allows treatment without opening Pandora's box. Our family, and more specifically Marlo, is fortunate that my profession provides the income and flexibility that allows us to seek this treatment in Colorado. But for many Georgia families, this is not an option. In short, I feel that if Georgia does not find a way to provide this treatment for the desperate families that need it, our state will, by default, do harm to its citizens. I know a solution exists that can bring my wife and 5 children back to the state of Georgia that we and our extended families have called home for generations. I know if this committee and the legislators at the Capitol focus on what truly is at stake here, that they will put aside any differences and will work together to find that solution. I know that if you stop and truly imagine this as one of your children or grandchildren, that you would do anything and everything possible to bring this treatment to Georgia. Regardless of your decision, Marlo will continue to be treated with cannabis oil, and she will continue to heal. My hope and my prayer is that we can return to Georgia to continue that treatment. Today, I ask, I beg, that you create the solution for the children and family of this state that so desperately need this treatment and can't afford to go elsewhere to receive it. Do that, and you can end the living hell they are enduring. I thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I appreciate you sharing your life with us, in effect. Members of the committee, I've got a handful of questions, but anybody? Well, Dr. Smith, talk to us about, and you mentioned a little bit this in your testimony about how can you be assured that what you're giving your daughter is a safe product? Can you walk us through the guidelines that are in place that maybe could shed some light on what we need to do here if a medical cannabis
I felt like I did due diligence before I decided that we were going to do this. I researched the process they have in Colorado. I was actually very impressed with how regulated it is. Every batch of the oil extract that she has is sent to an independent lab. We get the results of that. Her doctors get the results of that, and then we're able to give the specific dosing per each one of those batches. It tells us that there's no pesticides, no fungicides, the bacterial counts are low, and gives us the exact concentrations of the cannabidiol and the THC.
So some of the testimony we heard from other folks in another hearing was that there's bad batches of product that citizens are out there getting stuff that's that's got mildew and pesticide, but that has not been your case. You make sure you're getting a product that is lab tested at every phase of the process.
Every batch. I think some of what you may have heard refers to people who are attempting to get it through mail order, the internet, or other sources, and I agree with you. And that was something that Courtney and I looked into, and I told her, because she said, well, hey, we don't have to move out of Georgia. I found this website that says they can get it, and I just said, no, we're not going to do that. And that's the reason we're not going to do it, is because ultimately you have no regulation over it. You don't know exactly what you're giving each time. You can get higher doses of things that you expect. You can get those pesticides, the fungicides, the bacteria. Exactly.
Okay. If we are not able to pass medical cannabis legislation in 2015, what happens to your family?
We're condemned to stay in Colorado.
And so you would continue this routine that you've done for the last 5 months of being with your family for a week and
it's the
coming
first
home?
thing that has shown any any treatment, any quality of life, any preservation.
But the impact on you and Courtney, you'll either have to make a decision to leave a job that you currently have, either to move to another state and work there, I guess, or continue a bi-weekly trip to Colorado.
Yes, sir. When we set out to do this, we made a decision, a commitment that we would do it for 2 years, that we could live separately for 2 years, because she grew up here, I grew up here, our families, our friends, the vast majority of our relationships are all in this state, and we didn't want to leave those. So my hope was that if Georgia had another shot at it, they could get it right, and if they could pass something. I knew then by looking at other states that it still will take anywhere between 6 to 12 months for you to implement that. So we were prepared to stay for that time. If Georgia doesn't, then we'll have to make some hard decisions, and likely I'll have to permanently leave my job in Georgia and move out there.
Okay. You got a question? Yes, Senator Miller, let me bounce you on there.
Dr. Smith, based on your interactions with others, how many families would you say, could you estimate? I mean, is there any network of folks that are transplanted from Georgia and other states to Colorado, and any communication? Could you give us an idea how many people from Florida that you might know of? Excuse me, from Georgia that you might know?
Specifically from
all
Georgia?
Over the country, but I was thinking Georgia.
I think Peak knows the number that's specifically from Georgia. I mean, I know that there's 40 to 50 medical refugees that Jason Cranford is currently, when we were out there, and that number has almost doubled since. But I'm
Senator Miller, we know of 17 specific families that we just know of, that I know personally.
That we've come into contact with.
Right, and so that's probably just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg. There may be others, but we know of 17. So.
We appreciate very much, from my perspective, you coming forward today to testify. And when you talk about that tip of the iceberg, those 17 families that we know, there's probably many others that are under the radar, so to speak. And
I think there's a lot that would love to go if they had that option. They just don't have the financial means or the ability to.
Sure, I understand.
Dr. Smith, you bring a unique perspective as a physician. We heard from the medical community at our last hearing that there was a need, and there's the input we got was that we need to continue to go down the path of clinical trials done under the FDA approved process, and that there's a little bit of hesitation in the medical community to go down a path of offering medicine that hadn't been through that rigorous process. Could you, as a physician, and after going through your experience, can you comment on that?
I think everything has to be taken in the context of the big picture. And in the setting of my big picture, I had a daughter that was failing every known medical treatment and even experimental treatments for her seizure disorder. And we were told the progression is going to be permanent mental retardation, psychosis, and death. That's the barrel of the gun that we were facing. So to have tried everything that the FDA-approved process could throw at us, we felt like we had no other option. It's working. Do I think that those regulations are important? Certainly. But I also feel like that's why it's important that we be in charge of those regulations in Georgia on how it's produced, how it's controlled, and we can do the studies here. To deny this treatment, as I said earlier, I believe is doing harm. A lot of people will say, well, it's anecdotal. A lot in the research world will refer to it as an N of 1, where you only have one powered study. Well, when you've got several hundred N of 1s, it quits being anecdotal. So my opinion is that we can't withhold this treatment strictly hiding behind the statement of it needs to go through the regular FDA channels.
Okay. And of course, yeah, Michael. Senator Thompson, can you sneak that microphone to Representative Gravel?
Well, thank you. Doctor, thank you so much for your, well, yes.
Hang on. Is there a microphone? Is there a wireless over there? You got one, Candace?
We got it? Okay.
Here you go. Let's do this.
And Chairman Peak, one other thing that I will mention that you and I have discussed in previous meetings last year along the lines of the FDA, I find it almost laughable when people refer to the risks associated with this treatment. When I give my daughter a medication that says, not maybe, but there will be a percentage of people who develop liver failure, bone marrow failure, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, sudden death, you know, all the research on any marijuana doesn't have anything that remotely touches that. Right. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Let me just follow up on that. Excuse me, Reverend Gravely. So, you know, again, you've got a unique perspective as a medical physician and a father, but just want to be clear. So even though you've seen this experience with your daughter, would you hesitate at all if it was my child that I was bringing to you to say, would you prescribe, recommend, put them on medical cannabis for seizure disorders? Would you hesitate at all to
I would
provide
go
that
as
to another
far as
child?
to say that I would actually say I'd try that first line because I believe the side effect profile and the risk would actually be lower than the FDA-approved pharmaceutical medication.
Okay. Representative Gravely? Yep, sorry.
Dr. Smith, thank you so much for your testimony and for coming in, you and your wife from Colorado. I'm interested, as a physician, what has your interaction been with other physicians in Colorado? Some of the conversations or the discussions, some of the research that they're able to do out there. Could you kind of expand a little bit on that?
I believe that they've gotten over that hill of being naysayers. They've had enough patients. Their neurologists themselves are open to it enough. They've seen enough improvement that they're no longer saying, what if? They're saying it is. I mean, something as simple as the fact that we just saw my daughter's pediatric epileptologist 2 days before we came out here, and on the discharge instructions, he wrote, continue current dose of CBD oil.
Yeah.
Was your daughter's neurologist in Colorado?
Yes, sir. So this is in a medical legal document that he signed and gave to us as her discharge paperwork. He put that on it.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith, I'm going to continue to ask questions. We got you, so I'm going to got you
That's
all
fine.
open. There is concern that has been expressed to me that that we introduce medical cannabis legislation here, and that a lot of the physicians here in Georgia, because they haven't had experience with dosage amounts, potential side effects or symptoms, that they'll be at a disadvantage and therefore would maybe not be inclined to recommend cannabis. Can you address that? I mean, is that? I mean, obviously your profession, you guys are pretty smart, so I would imagine you're a pretty quick study. But is that a concern of yours that all of a sudden we're going to introduce this program, but we got doctors all over the state that don't know what to do, don't know how to dosage, don't know how to.
I think you're going to have some trailblazers. I think in like any industry and or profession, you're going to have people that are going to be the trailblazers. I feel confident. I don't want to name them out right now, but I know several pediatric epileptologists that would embrace the opportunity to have this in their treatment regimen, particularly for children that have irretractable seizures and nothing else is working. And from that, it will grow. As they have experience and can document and can show these patterns, their colleagues are going to see it and feel more comfortable with it. And I think that's sort of the wildfire that spread in Colorado.
So you don't think that should be a concern for us, or that's okay? I want to go on board basis. Okay, thanks. Any other questions from members of the committee for Dr. Smith? Dr. Smith, thank you. We appreciate it. We want to bring you home, you and your wife, permanently. So we're going to do our dead level best to do that. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next presenter, Mr. Rick Allen, who's sure.
Sorry. Hey, how are you? We had lunch last week, so probably spent more time than you had up here, didn't we? A lot more time. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm late. I was with a group of developmental disabled folks, and the kids were a little bit slower in walking and getting their food, and I was helping them get their food and making sure they got lunch. But I appreciate everyone being here. And I just looked at the agenda, and I noticed on the agenda that I had added Virginia Galloway, and she is here. And if we could just have her in between, after Mr. Allen, that would be great.
And we will make that happen if that's your request. Yep.
Yeah, I had put her on there, and I don't know how it got left off,
Yep.
but it got left off. She actually came to Augusta, and I met her in Augusta,
Okay.
and she has to be on the agenda.
We did not have her on the agenda, but we will, at your request, add her. That it'll be Ms. Galloway. You are here. Yep. Okay. It'll probably be 5 or 10 minutes. It'll be a real quick presentation. We'll get you on there. We'll do you after Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, you want to come up and visit with us? I know you're moving slow, but we're glad to have you here. And Mr. Allen is director of Georgia Drugs and Narcotics Agency for our state. Has been a long-time public servant. Has done a great job for our state. So we're glad to have you here, and look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, sir. It's moving a little bit slower than normal, but it took me a while to finally get here. First of all, for those who don't know, yes, I'm Director of Georgia Drugs and Narcotics. I am a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for over 40 years. In fact, when I began, I worked with, well, I still call it medical college. I hadn't started calling it Regents yet. But I was in charge of the premature infants ICU for the pharmacy. So I'm very aware and very compassionate with the problems with children. I worked there. That was my entire being, when I was there. But I have been with drugs and narcotics for over 38 years. I have been the director for almost 5 and was the deputy director for over 20. What I'm going to bring you this morning, the reason I couldn't appear before your earlier hearing, it was that I was attempting to track down the DEA and some of the people from Washington to get some answers about the cannabis. And so I'm going to give you a federal viewpoint, then I'm going to give you some I guess you would call it, I wouldn't say facts, but reality of what's going on in Georgia. And I've spoken at length with the director of the Florida cannabis program and give you some words of advice from them.
Okay.
But federally, cannabis is still a Schedule I controlled substance. Anything to do with the cannabis plant is controlled. A seed, one seed, is a controlled substance. The only thing that stands between the federal authorities and the marijuana farms or the cannabis farms and the growing is a memo from 2013 that this committee is probably very aware of. And that memo could go away tomorrow. It's not a point of law. It's not a rule. It's just something that told the U.S. attorneys across the country, you're not going to prosecute anybody having to do with cannabis unless they violate one of these 8 kind of like guidelines, one of which is to bring cannabis across state lines. The DEA, other law enforcement, still conduct raids on marijuana grows, cannabis grows across the country. They do it daily. They go after farmers that do not follow these guidelines. I'm afraid there are many, as Mr. Golick and Mr. Spouse down there knows. There's some bad people in the world that take advantage of good people. And the DEA is out there making sure that the bad people don't do wrong, and get away with it. And right or wrong, and I don't agree with it at all, arrest of parents that come across state lines with the CBD oil have continued. I don't know if they're being prosecuted, but they're being arrested. One happened last week in the Midwest. You know, it's still out there, it's still a reality, regardless of all these laws. Now, as I said, trying to track down a federal official that wants to talk about cannabis is like trying to find somebody that owes you money. You're not going to get them to talk to you. I went to meetings with Washington officials, and when you ask this question about cannabis, you're met with overwhelming silence. They don't want to talk about it. I've never, like I said, been doing this over 38 years, and I've never seen anything like this in my life where nobody, especially a DEA agent, that don't want to talk about something that they're like cannabis. I persisted and used my old age and contacts, and I finally was able to convince several of these officials to sit down with me. In fact, there were 4 of them, but only if I do not reveal what agency they're with and their names or anything such as that. But I'm going to tell you what they told me, where their thoughts are, and they could be fired for even talking to me. First of all, that the U.S. is not going to change its stance on cannabis. FDA is not. Well, nothing's going to change on Schedule 1 controlled substance with cannabis unless the FDA changes its stance. DEA is not going to deregulate it. And unless you can get Congress to decriminalize it, it's not going to happen. Not anytime soon. DEA, well, I won't say DEA. There was a room full of federal people. But they ask, and I've heard, that the THC presence in the CBD oil, they say, where are the studies that show this? I know that Dr. Smith's compassionate and everyone else is compassionate with their testimony. But they say, where are the studies that show that THC is necessary in CBD oil? They say there are none. No accepted scientific studies. There are reams of studies about how THC will damage a brain or affect a person. They say if you bring them studies or bring FDA studies that show them why this THC is necessary and show them how the effects are using it, its presence or not having its presence, that would go a very long way towards helping solve part of this problem. And I believe Representative Peake and I had this conversation about hemp. The federal farm bill passed on hemp that there's only 0.3% THC in hemp. Legally, it's only used to make rope. The feds know for sure. You can only buy hemp seeds from the U.S. Agriculture Department, and you can only get measured amounts of it. And you go to a field that they watch and they regulate. The feds know for sure that some of these hemp growers take their seeds, and the point is, a hemp field looks exactly like a marijuana field, no difference. Not to us. You and I couldn't look at it and tell the difference. They dump their hemp seeds somewhere along the way, get cannabis seeds, and they grow field after field of cannabis. Okay, all right, testing for percentage. The Agriculture Department does not test for percentage of THC. They only test for presence of THC. And law enforcement is prohibited from making any cases on hemp growers, more or less. So you've got unscrupulous people out there taking advantage of the system with hemp. So that's why they don't believe the hemp is the answer. Producing CBD oil, I commend Dr. Smith for what he's did and watched how his oil was processed. There are many ways, not many, probably about 10 ways to produce CBD oil. The most effective is what I'll speak on later, but most of which the federal investigators have found is something called butane gas method. And a butane gas method is essentially sticking your leaves and resin, your leaves, stems, what have you, in something like a PVC pipe, sticking caps on it with salt shaker ends on one end and a hole at the other. They run butane gas through it. What comes through at the end is an oil that you have to let the butane come off of it, then you have to wash it. And that is what they were emphatic, that was how most of the oil is being produced in this method. They say there used to be meth lab explosions all over Southern California. They say now there's at least one butane gas honey oil explosion a day with people making this because they get in a hurry and they don't let the butane go away, and they're not the brightest people in the world, and they light a cigarette or something, and that's the end of it. As for Georgia, now that was the end of my federal conversation. That took most of the day.
Keep moving quick. We got a lot of
I'm going
to
to
cover. So, yes, sir.
As far as access, like I said, the seeds are a problem. Florida says they don't really worry about the seeds. The seeds are just going to show up, and that's your decision. Florida, even though they passed the law, they still have nothing. They have no grow down there. They have no processing. They have nothing. They got until January to produce. They don't have anything at this point. They haven't been able to do it. The biggest problem I was told is that the law that was passed in Florida was completely inadequate. It did not address what needed to be addressed. Every rule they write is turned down by an administrative law judge, saying, well, you don't have the authority to say that. Just like, okay, we're going to produce oil. This is how you're going to produce oil. We're going to test it, blah, blah, blah. And the administrative law judge said, well, the law does not give you the authority to write a rule. So they threw it out. And that was one of the biggest things they said. If you're going to write a law up there, you make sure it covers what needs to be covered. Again, I'm not going to get back into the CBD oil production, but I was given the analogy about what's going on in some of these places that if you remember the Beverly Hillbillies and Granny out by the cement pond with her steel, that's essentially how a lot of this is being made. Not all of it, but I'm saying some of it. And some of it is what causes bad for everybody else. Another big thing that apparently nobody asked this question. If you pass a law in Georgia saying that there's going to be X percentage of THC allowed in the CBD oil, the state crime lab cannot test for percentages. They have no equipment. They have no ability. They don't have their scientists. So if someone comes in from Colorado with CBD oil, and even though it meets, if you test it in Colorado and it comes in with the, 0.3% THC level, and you get stopped in Podunk, Georgia, and you get arrested, and they send that to the crime lab, it's going to come back as positive for THC. It's not going to show you the percentage. So unless this committee or the legislature somehow will find it in their hearts to fund the equipment and manpower, person power, for the crime lab, you're going to have a heck of a problem there. And the same goes if you're dealing with the agriculture department or whoever's going to test these places. What Governor Deal has proposed, I know it's not acceptable to most, but from what we've seen, it is the most viable, safe method. Me being a pharmacist, I see what GW has done, GW Pharmaceuticals. It works. The only problem is there's just not enough of it. The strange part is, right now, Florida is turning to Georgia to try to find out how Governor Deal is allowing the GW Pharmaceuticals to use their product for clinical trials, because they don't have it down there. They can't get it. So Florida is turning to Georgia for an example of how to get their oil. I'm moving as fast as I can, sir. Just in summary, and I think it was alluded to, if we passed a law today in Georgia and it went into effect tomorrow, the very earliest it would be 6 months before the marijuana could even be grown. And who knows who's going to produce it? Who is going to produce it? That's the problem. Is the farmer's going to produce the oil? Are you going to take it to a third party? Florida suggested, in fact, in Florida, they're going to have their farmers are going to produce the oil. They're even going to distribute the oil. That keep it as simple as possible. Don't spread it all over and make problems that you don't need. The elephant in the room, the federal authorities are watching every grow operation in the country. They're watching very closely in case that memo goes away. If somebody steps out of line, they're going to be there. They're going to make cases. So if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. 2 years ago, there was a national disaster when a compounding pharmacy in New England, actually in Boston, compounded a product. They didn't have sterile procedures in place. They had black mold in their lab, in their compounding lab. Over 70 people died and over 700 had been infected with hepatitis. Since that time, the FDA in every state has just gone absolutely off the charts about how to inspect compounding pharmacies. We're having to train our people especially to how to do this. The FDA has come up with rules that are just enormous. And this has all been done in an effort to protect the public. And what I'm seeing and what I would beg of you is to, if you're going to have CBD oil in Georgia, do not lower the standards for these children so that they're less than you and I would expect from the pharmacy, where we have to go in and regulate them beyond reason almost. These poor children need the same protection. And with that, I'll open myself up.
Mr. Allen, thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll see if there's some questions. Let me just a couple of comments on one. Thank you. Clearly, we have some challenges, and that you've raised for us that I think are all good for us to hear about. The good news is that one little piece of legislation that I'm intimately familiar with that's already been pre-filed addresses every single one of those issues directly. In fact, the testing that is done for the product that is eventually given to citizens has stricter safety standards than for baby food.
Good.
And so those are all very good points. I thank you for bringing them up. The good news is I think you're going to see probably in potential pieces of legislation that may be out there that those issues are addressed. But one other thing too, I know you said you were worried about if there were potential businesses that would even grow it. I can assure you, I've had several that have already approached me that are ready to invest millions of dollars in Georgia
I know who some of them are.
to move this forward. So, any questions from members of the committee for Mr. Allen? Okay, Chairman Unum.
I was wondering about the byproducts of when you extract the oil. What happens to the byproducts? Is there disposal mechanisms? I mean, what do you do with the product that's left over?
That's a good question. Theoretically, once the butane goes through there or whatever process is done, there's nothing left but stems, like a plant that has no controlled substance in it. Even though it may test as a controlled substance, there'd be no viable activity in it. But how it's disposed of, I honestly can't tell you. It would have to be done by EPA accepted method, just the same as a one-a-day vitamin is considered hazardous waste. I would imagine cannabis stems would be considered similar.
Senator Unum, the states that we've looked at do have, the ones that have been successful do have protocols for that, for incineration or disposal that does hopefully address that. So,
would that disposed product still be a controlled substance or an illegal substance?
It would probably have to be tested, ma'am, to see if there's anything left. There's not supposed to be, but you could have to test it to see if there's any actual content in it, to see what's in there.
My other question is about page 4. And you're talking about if a physician prescribed medical cannabis, he or she would be in violation of the DEA laws and could lose their DEA permit. And it says in Colorado and other states, practitioners recommend that patients can benefit from the use, blah, blah, blah. So my question is, what you're saying is any physician in the state of Georgia would lose their license to prescribe other medications. But I think my main question is, there are physicians prescribing it in Colorado, obviously.
Well,
so why are those physicians not losing their licenses under federal laws?
because they don't prescribe by the letter of the law. They recommend.
They recommend it. They don't write a prescription.
No, ma'am.
Well, is it not an infraction if it's against the law and you're telling someone? Is that ethically? I guess you don't deal in ethics.
Depends on your state, but if you say I prescribe and I have wrote a prescription, then you open yourself up for.
I think Dr. Smith and I talked about this because you go to a physician, but they don't write it, right? They make a recommendation, right?
Right. We researched that last year. I was under the assumption that they wrote prescriptions, and then when I found out they didn't, then I was told, but that's how they get around it.
And I think, I'm sorry.
And I guess my next question is also on page 4. It said even if this law went in effect till tomorrow, that the oil would not be available for many months, perhaps a year or longer. What are you basing that on?
Well, it takes 150 to 160 days to even put it in the seed in the ground to grow the product. You don't know if your first grow is going to yield an actual product. Then you're going to have to produce the oil. You're going to have to get it tested. You're going to have to get it certified. So who knows? A year would be probably max. 6 months would be the minimum. So somewhere in that range.
And that brings up one other question I remember from Augusta. And I think we asked them, and maybe you can clarify it, Representative Peake. If GW Pharmaceuticals, if we're in a clinical trial and they ship the product from England into the United States and say it came FedEx or UPS, I wasn't quite clear how that process works. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you must have other clinical trials that substances come in that are not approved either, right?
Right. What they do is they're considered a Schedule 1. You get a special, you get a researcher permit from the Board of Pharmacy. And once you get that, you're allowed to get a Schedule 1 researcher permit from DEA. Once you have that, you were able to purchase this product. GW has a distributor that is licensed to distribute to researchers in Georgia. So once you have your permits in place, say Dr. So-and-so in Augusta, then all he has to do, they have the DEA Schedule 1 order forms. They order what they need from the distributor. It doesn't actually come from England. It comes from some other location. And that location ships it to the doctor in Augusta or the doctor up here at Eggleston. And then that doctor is in charge of it. They keep it in a safe. They have to keep up with each dose just like a pharmacy would or a hospital would. And they label it or they don't, however they would do it. I don't know if they do blind studies. But that physician is in charge of keeping up with every dose. But they're the ones that order it, but they have permits in place in order to obtain it in the first place.
Chairman Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Allen, I'm trying to get my head around the procedural dynamics of what's going on in other states and then trying to relate it back to what's being potentially considered here. In another state, you mentioned Colorado a few minutes ago, and the DEA license to prescribe, for lack of a better term. So if I'm understanding correctly, what's happening in Colorado is that potential patients are going to doctors. Doctors are not actually prescribing medical marijuana. They're recommending usage for certain conditions. Those individuals, I assume, are then going to commercial enterprises as per the Colorado ballot initiative of whenever that was, that allows for that, and they're medicating and they're receiving that medication, receiving the cannabis in some form, at some level, not from any sort of pharmacy, but from just a random commercial enterprise that may be licensed to do that.
They call them in dispensaries.
Okay. So even in a state that has legalized recreational use of marijuana, there's still no prescribing going on. It's simply a doctor making his or her best recommendation based on their professional experience and the patient that presents to them on a case-by-case basis. And the patient is taking it upon himself or herself to go to a commercial enterprise, a dispensary, whatever it is, and to get what the doctor has recommended to treat themselves. That's the way that occurs. Is
Yes,
that right?
Sir.
Okay.
Correct.
So if we're talking about it here, at the end of the day, we still wouldn't. I guess my question is, would those individuals still be those individuals, even if a doctor recommended that, still wouldn't be able to go to some particular place in the absence of a very large broadening of our law?
They can't go to Walgreens, no.
I mean, so if we're talking about the oil or some expansion of that to some degree, we could expand it as far as Colorado would do. I don't think that's going to occur. But let's say hypothetically that occurred. It's still, if I'm understanding the procedural dynamics, that which the individuals are looking for still wouldn't exist because we haven't broadened the law.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
what's going on in Florida. I think.
So it's like an all or nothing proposition if
Right.
I'm understanding it from a practical standpoint.
Right. You're going to have to set up in the law or rules or however you want to word it. And you're head of judiciary, so you understand that as better than anybody. You're going to have to set down where they're going to get their product and who's going to supply it to them. What you're essentially doing is creating a pharmaceutical industry, which is a cannabis industry. You're going to affect the grower, you're going to affect the producer of the oil, and you're going to affect the dispenser.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right. in the absence of this broad model that we see in Colorado as an example, and the practical procedural realities of recommendation on its, as the avenue to treatment. If we had a situation hypothetically in a model in Georgia where the mechanism existed, but the mechanism was a tightly controlled government structure, not an industry. It's frankly, it's a it's a government run. If you had agricultural entities controlled by the state government, so it'd be intrastate where that potential grow would occur, and then doctors would still not be, even if we had that model in the state. I'm walking and talking myself through it and trying to make sure I understand it. Even if we had that from an intrastate standpoint, let's say we had the agricultural department, we established this program in the state ag department, and we did the 6 months to a year, and we had very tight controls on distribution and so forth, where the hang-up still occurs even within the intrastate model and the 6 months to a year that you described. And that's if everything goes smoothly. We still face, there's still no way a doctor can prescribe it. What's the practical mechanism from we had the intrastate grow to a patient? What's the avenue there?
The recommendation. In Colorado, that when you go to the registry, I believe y'all were going to create a registry here in Georgia, marijuana registry. You'd have a patient be registered, as in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Once you have a marijuana card, same in California, you take that card and you go to the physician, and then you're examined. And the physician says, okay, well, you can benefit from the use of CBD oil. And I'm not sure, I believe they have already pre-printed forms there that are filled out, have blanks, that the physician signs, and that's the recommendation. That form then is taken to in dispensary.
Yeah, I think the process is it starts the other way. It starts with the doctor. I think the patient goes to the doctor, and once they get the recommendation from the physician, then they are eligible to apply for a registration card. If I'm correct, is that correct, Dr. Smith?
I'm confusing it with California, because they can go to the boardwalk down there and go to the physician.
We don't want to become California.
So it's really the distinction is really one where you have this larger dispensary reality in other states, which I don't sense will occur here, versus an intrastate, potentially absolutely tightly regulated intrastate government entity. I don't see there being any room between those two.
No. What you're looking at is a play on words. How much have you dealt with the DEA, sir? Not enough. The word prescribe, and the same with the medical board. You cannot prescribe a drug that is not approved.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where you get in the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
The comment I'd give Chairman Golick on that is, the one thing as I've been immersed in this is that there's good models to look at already. There's 33 states that have this already in place, and so, we can take the best practices, I think, of the most effective models and come up with the best one in the country, I think, is what our plan. Is there any other questions? Otherwise, we need to kind of keep moving. So, Mr. Spaho. Hang on one second. Let me make sure I got you there. Okay.
Hello? Okay. Alan, can I take you back to the beginning when we were talking about the federal stance on this? To make clear, the federal law has not changed about this.
Not one iota.
Okay. And since 2009, we're now on our third memo, correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you read all three of those memos and have some context with them?
Yes, sir.
So all three of them have been a change in stance by the Attorney General?
Correct.
Okay. But the legislature's not active. And is there any reason to believe that couldn't change tomorrow?
No reason whatsoever.
So the other than this memo, the DEA and other federal authorities could go back at any point and start prosecuting these cases?
That was made very clear to me.
Okay.
when I met with these people.
When you do read these memos and you get into the detail of them, they analyze the concepts of control and quite frankly, how broad this thing gets. The broader it gets, the more interested the federal government is. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So if Georgia is to do anything in clear violation of federal law, the broader we get, the more likely we become the target if the federal government starts back to prosecute these cases.
I'm afraid that's correct.
That's all I have.
Okay. Senator Thompson?
Yes, and I've asked this question before of another witness, but I do understand the situation with Schedule 1, but my question before was, my understanding is that states have been doing this since about 1993, that some states have very broad models like California, some have very narrow models, I think like Missouri or Alabama, some are in the middle like Arizona and Indiana. But nowhere could I find an example of a doctor being prosecuted for making one of these recommendations since 1993, which would cover the Clinton years, the Bush years, and the current administration. It would cover very hostile attorneys general to this type of system, like Attorney General Ashcroft, and those who've been more amenable to it, like the current Attorney General. Are you aware of anyone actually going to jail or losing their license over this?
Not prosecution-wise, but I believe there have been medical board cases made, which is probably...
Because they're not prescribing it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the fear of something that doesn't seem to have happened in 20 years, and I appreciate the fear of things, but I want us to be realistic about the fear. The sky can fall, but I want us to make sure that we're being realistic about whether the sky will fall.
And just one final comment on that. Thank you, Senator Thompson.
That's it.
I mean, it's clear, and I think the committee needs to understand, there are 33 states that have medical cannabis legislation already on the books. And no, we're not one of those states. No, we're not included in that list because there's no access. And so, state law, well, yes, there is a potential that if we draft legislation that would be in violation of federal law, we still have state law that protects our citizens and our physicians and the growers as long as we're within the guidelines that have been established by the Department of Justice. So. Okay, Mr. Allen, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your service to our state as well, too. Appreciate that, and we wish you, hope you get well really quick, too. Glad to appreciate taking time. Okay, Ms. Galloway, I know we held you up for a little bit, and I'm sorry to do it, but I'm going to ask you to go real quick, hit your points really quick, and just why don't you tell the committee, make sure most of us know who you are, but why don't you make sure we know who you are.
Good afternoon. I'm Virginia Galloway. I am the Southern Regional Director for the Faith and Freedom Coalition. I've worked here in Georgia, lived in Georgia all my life, worked here with many of you. I thank the committee for giving me a few minutes to speak. I appreciate Chairwoman Unterman inviting me. And let me just say from the get-go that I applaud the motives of you who serve on this committee to hear what has been said, from a lot of different parties, to listen, to have a heart of compassion, I think is extremely important, and I really applaud you for that. And I also have tremendous sympathy for these families as a mother and a grandmother myself, which is the joy of my life, both of those. I really understand you don't want your children hurt. I get that. At the same time, I have been very concerned about this bill from the get-go. Last session, as we were talking about it, I felt like there were a lot of questions that were unanswered that needed to be heard, and I was really glad to hear that a study committee was going to be formed on that. But I still have concerns, and I've listened to the testimony that you have listened to as well, and I have a number of different areas where I have concern. I have concern about the research to this day. The very first question I asked as I met with some of you is I would like to see the research. Again, we find that there's been no formal double-blind placebo study, the kind that they do on medicine on a regular basis. I believe Senator or Chairwoman Unterman asked at the last meeting, why haven't states with legalized marijuana already sponsored these studies? They have done research on mice. They've done some short-term studies. What about long-term studies? And why are we doing drug testing on children? It seems to me like that's kind of an odd way to do things. The effects of THC, I have listed them in the paper that I gave you. I won't go through them now. But my question is, at what point does a potential drug with small amounts of THC have serious but non-psychoactive effects, some of these other effects that THC can have? One of the things I've heard from the get-go is that there's very bad side effects with the other anti-seizure medication. But as we were talking about the study at the last hearing, I understood them to say that if we did a study here, it would just be an add-on drug to the ones that still existed. So wouldn't they still have those same side effects along with this drug and whatever side effects may come with it? Monitoring and evaluation is a big question for me. How would this happen? Who would be in charge of it? And then if, let's say the study ended, what happens to the children who were involved in the study then? How do they get medication? Can they still get it? I mean, how long is this going to be in effect? My next area of concern is the scope of the bill. I'm very concerned that as we started talking about this bill, I was told we're not even considering legalizing marijuana. Now there's SR 6, a resolution referendum to allow for full legalization of marijuana. And that's a concern. I think it may be a distraction so that we go, oh, well, we're just going to do it for medical. It's not so bad. I don't know what the intent is there. Outside of that discussion, my other questions would be what conditions may be considered treatable? Just seizures, chronic pain, arthritis, anxiety, PTSD? Who will be able to get the product? Will it be just children or will it be for adults too? Will other marijuana-based products or forms be considered? For what period of time will authorization of use extend? Will all doctors be able to prescribe or recommend the product, whichever path you guys choose? Again, we heard the questions, who will dispense and who will monitor that? Then we have the legal issues, and I think the previous person handled those very well, except that I have two things that I have read articles about this actually happening in California and other states. One is because of the conflict with federal law, that DFACS has come in and taken children of people who had a prescription for medical marijuana. And they were able to get it legally in their state, but because it was a Schedule I substance, DFACS was still able to come in and take their child. The other thing would be civil forfeiture, which we've had quite a few lively discussions around here about civil forfeiture. If I'm driving through South Georgia somewhere or North Georgia, anywhere, and I have this in my possession and someone stops me and they suspect me of having an illegal drug, they can take my car, they can take any cash that I happen to have with me. If I have it in my home, maybe they can take my house. I mean, that's a real concern, and I hope that we will address that. There's also workforce questions about drug testing and that kind of thing, because I understood from the hearing last time that this would be for people up, one of the ideas with the study would go up to 18 years old. Well, you can work, and you might be subject to drug testing. So how does that play out? Then there are the ethical issues, and I was very interested that one of the doctors last time was asked flat out, would you recommend this for your patients right now if it were available and legal in the state of Georgia? And she said, no, I would not. It would be unethical to treat children that were not a part of a controlled study with a drug that hasn't undergone rigorous testing and gained approval. There's also three other ethical issues. One of them would be that maybe we are unwittingly on a path to full legalization. The second would be that law enforcement clearly asked at that hearing in Gwinnett County, they asked for authority to conduct warrantless searches to cite and arrest offenders, can the Georgia legislature invalidate constitutional rights? More importantly, what happens the next time somebody comes up with a cure? Is the Georgia legislature going to start taking this on as part of their purview to override the FDA and do drug approval? It just seems out of the range of expertise, even though I have a great deal of respect for your intelligence and all that. I wouldn't want that responsibility of doing a drug approval, but I would want to leave that to the agency that has been tasked with that. Then there's the cost and the messaging issue, and I won't go into all those issues. We've talked about them a little bit. The cost of research, the cost of regulation, the cost of enforcement, and then the messaging. I know last year people thought just because you guys were talking about passing a bill that marijuana was legal in Georgia. I was hearing that out there everywhere. It was crazy. I was like, are you kidding? No, you read a little bit of a headline and you got this, this crazy idea that this was legal. I understand they were calling the doctors and hospitals asking for the product at that time, and that's of great concern. I hope we'll be more careful on the messaging as we go forward with this. I'm going to end with a quick story that happened to me years ago with my dear neighbor who suffered a heart attack. And I was there when she had her first heart attack. She called me over to her house, and I called the ambulance, and they came and got her. And after she got out of the hospital, she had a lot of things to do, errand-wise, getting medicine and that kind of thing. So I took her around, spent several parts of days, many days, taking her to do this and that. Well, one afternoon, her daughter showed up on my porch, and she said, Mama's not feeling well. Can you take her to the doctor? And I said, I just can't do it today. And I really, really felt bad that I was, like after she left, I thought, boy, I'm terrible. And I said, maybe you better call an ambulance. And so she went back. She called an ambulance. The ambulance came. I felt horrible. I thought, she just asked me to take her to the doctor. Maybe I should have done that. Well, it turned out that 2 blocks from her house and my house, she had a massive heart attack that had she not been in that ambulance and had been in my care, she would be dead. And so I guess there's 2 morals to that story. First of all, don't ever call me in a medical emergency. I'm terrible. But more seriously, sometimes we have a great desire to help, but it's just not what we need to be doing. Maybe it's for someone that has a different perspective and view on it to do this. So,
okay, Ms. Galloway, thank you for the testimonies just by folks that are presenting, and any disruptions you'll be asked to leave the room. Ms. Galloway, thank you. Are there questions? I have a couple of comments. Ms. Galloway, just a couple things real quick regarding the studies that you gave. That's the Epidiolex trial, which is the governor's initiative, and that's not something that we're involved in. I mean, that's you'd have to ask the governor's office on that.
Okay.
And as far as the ethical issues about whether a doctor would give this, you have to ask Dr. Smith about that. I think he answered that better than anybody else. And then finally, let me just make sure I'm clear. Is this the position of you personally, or is this the position of Faith and Freedom Coalition of Georgia?
Both.
Okay. Faith and Freedom Coalition is Ralph Reed's group.
Correct.
Is that correct? With all due respect, I know you to be one fine Christian woman, and a conservative to the core.
Yes.
And for the life of me, I cannot understand someone as conservative as you who puts so much trust in the federal government on this issue and be against the state controlling the destiny for its own citizens. I just cannot for the life of me understand that. So,
and I understand your concern. There's a lot of areas where I would agree with that.
And letting parents make the decision of what's in the best interest. It seems complete paradox. And you can share that with Mr. Reed as well, too. So.
I'll do that.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Galloway.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Roma, wait, committee, here's what we got. We got It's 2:30, and Roma has prepared a summary of what we believe is kind of the findings from our hearings so far. Roma, I'm going to ask you to go through that real quick. Each of you have that. If you have any questions about it, I ask maybe you'd hold it and just let Roma go through it real quick, and we'll discuss it at the appropriate time. I want to make sure that each member has an opportunity to have a closing statement today about whatever is important to you regarding this issue. And so Roma Amin, who's done an incredible job, along with the Senate staff, again, thank y'all too for all the work that you've done to pull this together. And so go ahead, Roma, why don't you, and make sure everybody's got, if you'll hold up, kind of make sure we know what we're, this is the, Joint Study Committee on Christian, yes. So why don't you hit just the high points real quick.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Roma Amin, and I'm with the House Budget and Research Office. I'm going to present a list of potential recommendations based on testimony from previous meetings. These are offered for the purpose of discussion by the members of the committee. The first set of recommendations deal with changes to existing Georgia statutes on controlled substances. The General Assembly should leave unamended any statute that prohibits the use of marijuana. However, we should create an exception for qualified patients who are registered with the state and have been issued a patient registry card. Additionally, the Georgia General Assembly should fully repeal the Controlled Substances Therapeutic Act of 1980. The next set of recommendations deal with support for clinical research. The General Assembly should create a statutory authorization for state-approved medical research to be conducted by our medical universities. Such statute should also prohibit medical marijuana from being unlawfully present in any of these medical facilities unless the federal government or the lead administrator at that medical facility has approved that use for a cardholder. The General Assembly should also should continue to support Georgia Regents University in its pursuit of conducting clinical trials on Epidiolex. The last set of recommendations deal with the establishment of a strictly regulated process for cultivating, processing, and dispensing certain strains of marijuana. This legislation should contain a requirement that approved medical marijuana shall not be smoked. The program should exceed the guidelines issued by the United States Department of Justice and the Cole Memorandum regarding marijuana enforcement. The program should require licensing and registration of medical marijuana businesses at the Department of Revenue. The program should require the use of secure, real-time inventory tracking system to be managed by the Department of Revenue that uses radio frequency identification tagging to track every cannabis plant from seed to sale. The legislation should authorize state and local law enforcement agencies to access tracking system information, enter the premises of any medical marijuana business at any time, and increase drug trafficking penalties for any licensee that convicted for criminally diverting medical marijuana. Legislation should also provide immunity from prosecution for crimes including, but not limited to, crimes under the Georgia Controlled Substances Act for cardholders or caregivers in possession of medical marijuana obtained from a retail medical marijuana business in Georgia or obtained lawfully from another state. Legislation should direct the Department of Public Health to establish and utilize a confidential patient registry database. Legislation should set strict guidelines to implement statutory requirements for physicians to recommend medical marijuana to a patient. Legislation should create a physician advisory board to counsel the Department of Public Health and issue findings to the Commissioner of Public Health and to the Georgia General Assembly. And finally, such programs should employ the most stringent laboratory testing requirements for medical marijuana, both upon harvest of the plant and after processing it into a product. That concludes the list of potential recommendations, and the floor is now open for committee discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amin. I appreciate you doing that. Again, the Senate research team for doing that. This is a set of guidelines to the committee that should be given consideration for any potential legislation. It's not, we're not bound to it. We're not going to take a vote on it. This is just a set of guidelines for the committee. Okay, we're going to take this opportunity to give everybody on the committee 5 minutes to chat about your assessment of this dialogue about medical cannabis. You can say what you want, or you don't have to say anything. We'll leave that up to each member. Ms. Fails, we'll also allow you an opportunity as well too, even though you're not a voting member of the state of Georgia. You represent a group that is that is elected officials, and so we're also going to give you, Madam Chair. We'll let you go first if you want. You have longer than 5 minutes as co-chair, so we'll let you.
I appreciate everyone. I especially appreciate the families that have come around the state.
Oops, sorry. There we go.
Worked with the committee, and you know, we've been, I don't know how many places, 4 or 5 places. I appreciate that. I will say that this is a little bit different study committee. I think I'm on 5 study committees this year, and I've been on study committees ever since I've been down here. And this one has been run different than other study committees. So, and I know Dr. Burke's not here, so I would suggest that members of the committee can submit to Senate Research in particular. This was a Senate bill that created this, and make recommendations. And those can be incorporated. I understand these are guidelines. I've never seen Senate Research present guidelines like this before on any study committee I've ever served on. So this is very unusual. And I don't think they should, I think they are, like you said, guidelines, and I appreciate them, but you know, they you know, you could consider them to incorporate them into a bill or not. And I have been working with the Prosecuting Attorneys Association and some other groups, and I met with them last night for a couple hours at the Gwinnett County Courthouse, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, we'll start. Mr. Spahels, you want to go first, and then we'll go to our elected officials after that. Let me make sure I got you ready to go. There you go.
So I can't waive opening and reserve closing?
No, you cannot.
All right. I want to make clear from the standpoint of the prosecutors in this state, we hold the same position we did when it started on this one clear issue.
Yeah, if you hold that thing close to you,
there's
so we'll
no
make sure
prosecutor in this state that has any interest in prosecuting these families for possessing this oil substance that obviously, based on what we've heard, is having an effect on these children. So make sure we understand we're not here to obstruct that. I think I've made my points about federal law earlier, so I'm not going to go back through it. I do want to caution this committee, and this is the genuine concern that the prosecutors have, however far this piece of legislation may go. Some of the things that haven't been discussed, I've included a piece of research with you in your packet today that's been included, but I want to hit a couple of the highlights that we know are facts out of Colorado and out of Arizona. Since between 2007 and 2012 in Colorado, they've actually had a decrease in traffic fatalities overall. During that same period of time, the traffic fatalities, the operators that tested positive for marijuana during that same period increased 100%. In Laramar County, which is Fort Collins, Colorado, of the 131 driving under the influence arrest in 2013, almost 95% of them were for marijuana. Just the youth in Colorado, in 2006, Colorado ranked 14th in the nation for the past month's marijuana use amongst youth 12 to 17. In 2012, they're now the 4th. They've seen a 39% increase. Of the top 9 states for marijuana use in high school, the top 9 are all medical marijuana states. Of the top 10 states for overall use, they're all medical marijuana states, while the bottom 10 are non-medical marijuana states. Just a survey that was just released out of Arizona says that now 1 in 6 of the high school students that were surveyed with marijuana got that from a legitimate medical marijuana person, that's somebody that had a card and had that. That's an 18.5% increase since a survey a year previously. These statistics are, we're not making these up. I want everybody to understand when we start down this road and this substance becomes more readily available in this state, these are the kind of statistics we're going to have to deal with, and we need to make sure that that's the kind of things we're ready to add to Georgia. That's the position we're in. Again, we don't want to stand in the way of this cannabinol oil being available for treatment, and however we have to go about making sure that that takes place. Nobody's got any interest in prosecuting that, but we can't disregard federal law. And we do believe that large-scale manufacturing of marijuana in Georgia and having it more readily available for our children is not a good idea.
Ms. Bass, just a quick question for the committee and for the public to know. Will the Prosecuting Attorneys Council come out with a position on a piece of legislation?
I suspect that they will by the end of this week. They they actually start this evening.
Okay. Well, or either on potential legislation. Obviously, I know there's two bills that have been introduced.
What I anticipate the District Attorneys Association will do, will take a stance on a few principles at this point.
Okay.
And then at a later point. I know the National District Attorneys Association has just taken some stances on some of the general principles, including being against the manufacturing of marijuana. But when we do that, I will certainly make every member aware of it.
That sounds good. Okay, we'll go to the members of the committee. You sure can. Mm-hmm.
And the statistics that you share are dramatic. We talk about abuse of marijuana and smoking marijuana and, for teenagers and for young adults and for accidents, and those should not be glossed over. When you mentioned those were states where medical marijuana was legal. Tell us, could you detail that a little more about, is that CBD oil only? Is that Colorado, for instance? Is it, where is that in the range of, we say medical marijuana. I think it's a little bit, could be misleading in this case when we're talking about the CBD oil. So if you could clarify that for me a little bit.
And I think that at least was the point I was trying to make is depending on where this piece of legislation falls and how broad the scope is and how available the product is. Obviously, Colorado and Arizona are towards one end of that spectrum. Some of the members of this committee are talking about a bill on the other end. Some of the members are talking about a bill on the far end. So our point of these numbers are to look at states that have now done this in whatever full scale they've done it and the results that they're seeing. So Colorado and Arizona are two states that, by our evaluation, the marijuana is more readily available in various forms.
And that's a fair statement. Using that end of the spectrum, so to speak, tell us about the same statistics on the other end of the spectrum, just for
what we did was we evaluated the states that have been in this process the longest and have gone to the furthest extent. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the states where there are a handful of states that have done a very limited, like oil-style, just possession. I could make a presentation on that, but I don't have all that in front of me. It's pretty detailed. I know it's also in that Senate packet that came out about the various states and what they've done. We obviously have taken the ones that have gone to the far side and seen this is how bad it's going to be if you let it go too far.
So just to be clear, there's no study or no information available this afternoon on states who have a restricted CBD oil only, very narrowly scoped.
As far as their traffic fatalities and that, we have not at this point prepared that research.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Mr. Spales was a little unique. For the rest of us, we'll make our statement. I know Chairman Under's already made hers. There won't be any back and forth. This is kind of your opportunity to kind of say what you want, and we'll go from there. We'll go rank the best order I can go. We'll go Chairman first. Chairman Golick, you want to? No way. Okay. And I think Chairman Miller, you want to go next? We'll let you. You got, yes, sir. Mm-hmm. You got your 5 minutes. There you go.
This is very serious business, and kind of like that old thing, major surgery and minor surgery. It's major if it's me, it's minor if it's you. These folks, these families, this is major. And it's major for the state of Georgia. We are evaluating and discussing a very volatile, very polarizing issues, and we would. And it's not a very safe territory for elected officials, but ships are safe in the harbor, but that ain't what ships are built for. And I wanted to express my appreciation to the folks who have come forward and testified, and my sympathy for those families who are involved in these circumstances. And I think as we go forward, we need to be very, very deliberative very, very cautious and very, very detailed and very narrow in scope if we go forward with any sort of proposed legislation at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this committee. Both you and Madam Chair, I appreciate it very much, and it's been very, very productive.
We've been glad to have you. Been an important part. Okay, we'll go. Representative Kaiser, you want to go next?
I definitely don't need 5 minutes. I just want to say to Chairman how much I appreciate being part of the committee, particularly meeting all the families, the impact that you've had on us as policymakers. I hope that this committee will go forward with the courage to do what's right. I think that we've heard this is not a first in Georgia. It's a first for Georgia, but it's not a first. And I think that, you know, we've heard from these families who are so impacted that we've learned enough now that I think that we are in a posture to be able to go forward. I'm thankful that we've had the participation by the prosecuting attorneys and physicians on our panel. And I honestly, personally hope that we also will consider the more compassionate care piece that we've talked about. So that's my personal position on it. And I like what Butch said, which is the ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what they're built for. So I trust that this committee will go forward and do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Kaiser. Okay, Senator Thompson, we'll go to you next.
Sure. I do want to, I guess, echo what Chairman Underman said. I want to thank everyone on the committee. In addition to, I guess, maybe the findings being different, I think we've done, at least for me in 12 years of being down here, we've met more often in more places, and folks came here with an open mind, not having, to my knowledge, already made up conclusions, because I watched people changing their opinions, and I appreciate the folks that followed the committee. It was like having groupies to have some of y'all show up at all the different committee meetings. And it's not a fish concert or anything.
They must have been nicer to you than they were to me. I'd call them terrorists.
But, yeah, it's really hard to follow your jokes, my friend. But thank you. I do appreciate, and I appreciate your leadership also, Representative Peake, on this. I don't think we would be this far if it weren't for you. I know that I didn't get elected, you know, even thinking about this issue much, and it wasn't until some families in my district came to me last session when your original bill last year was moving that it even got on my radar, and so I've had to educate myself a lot. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate hearing everybody's opinions, even those that I disagree with, even those that I think that aren't factually accurate. However, I guess some of the things that I hope that we'll take a look at when if any of us are crafting legislation, because admittedly yourself, Mr. Chairman, and myself, we've both introduced bills on this last year. We both introduced them this year. That we take what we've learned, whether these are via the comments or what have you, and put that to use here. I do appreciate the testimony from the prosecuting attorney council member. I do think that we ought to take a look at that, but we have to always remember that correlation is not causation, and that oftentimes in some of these states you may have to look at other factors. In states where medicinal marijuana may be, or medicinal cannabis may be legal, there's also less stigma in honestly answering the question, if you're a high school student, what's going on? So I wouldn't necessarily assume that the statistics are bearing out that. You have to look at the other politics of the other state too. So I just want us to make sure that we're not assuming that correlation is causation when we're looking at these statistics, and that we be careful about how we put things. You know, I would not have put Arizona at the left end. Arizona is a red state that wrote a vote that its legislature put into play what was a very strict and well-regulated bill, and it's one that admittedly I based the statute I introduced on, dealing with medicinal cannabis. You know, I would have put California and maybe New York that's decriminalized it at the far end of one spectrum, and maybe Alabama and Missouri, which I had mentioned maybe on the other end, where it's more of a CBD oil only thing. But I think when we're doing that, you know, that's all well and good, but what we really need to keep in mind is, you know, we've got folks in Georgia with serious illnesses. Some of them have come to us, some of them have been at all of these hearings, some of them are directly impacted by the availability of CBD oil, some of them are directly affected by the availability of being able to receive medicinal cannabis in some form. And I think we need to make sure that whatever we're looking at, if I were to try and come up with a guiding principle for anybody, and I understand people will come down different ways, is how can we make sure that a that a maximum number of Georgians who legitimately have these serious illnesses, whether that's AIDS or cancer or glaucoma, whether it's epilepsy or some other seizure disorder, that they have access to treatment. We're in a format that will treat their illness, and they have the ability to obtain that, since we're talking about medicinal cannabis, that medicinal, in this case medicinal cannabis, but that substance for treatment in both a format that will treat their illness, because not every format is applicable to every illness, but also that they have access to it reasonably, that it not be something that you have to be able to travel great distances or be able to afford to take a flight out of state and hopefully not get profiled on the way back into the state by a TSA agent and so on and so forth, that we need to come up with something that allows a maximum number of Georgians, regardless of where they live, regardless of their socioeconomic status, that if they have one of these serious illnesses that for about 21 years other states have allowed folks to receive treatment for, that they get it and in a format that they work with their physician about, not with the government, not with us. There's only one doctor, senator that's a doctor that I'm aware of currently serving, that they work with that too?
There'll be two coming.
Oh, that's right, two coming in. But that we let them making those decisions about the correct format for their illness and so on and so forth, that we need to stay out of that, but we need to make sure that they have that opportunity in a safe and regulated way that protects all of the concerns of law enforcement, all the concerns about those that are concerned about addiction rates and others, but that has that maximum amount of access possible.
Okay, thank you, Senator Thompson. Okay, Representative Gravely, here. Hang on, I want to make sure I got you going there. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, for asking me to serve on this committee and fighting on my behalf. I greatly appreciate that. It's been an honor to serve with all of you on this committee and the information and the relationships that we've built. I'd also like to thank the parents of these children, your advocacy and your voice on behalf of your child. I'd like to thank the other citizens across this state and the organizations, the groups that have provided this committee with a plethora of information. I truly appreciate your commitment to this process, the sacrifice that all of you have made to be at these committee meetings, and some of you who have even had to leave the state. Thank you so much. A year ago, December 7th will be a year ago, I had no knowledge of this issue. I was not aware of this issue until I received an email from a childhood friend of mine who lives in the county where I reside, letting me know that she was moving her son to Colorado. I spoke about that at length during my testimony on the floor last session. And since then, I've gotten to know other members in my own community, some of whom are here today, families from across the state, individuals that are suffering from a variety of different medical conditions that affect their daily lives and affect the quality of their daily life. And I appreciate those relationships very much, and I consider you friends. I want to read to you one of my favorite quotes, and it's a quote from President John Adams. It says, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclination, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." And I think it's an undeniable fact that this has stopped seizures, more so than the federal government's answer and approved drugs. It's an undeniable fact that people's lives have been changed by what we're discussing on this panel. I believe the evidence is overwhelming by the testimonies that we heard, by the scenarios and the daily ins and outs of individuals' lives that we heard displayed from the podium is overwhelming. Overwhelming in the instance that we know nothing about what we could know about this medicine, that we need to go further with trials, that we need to further We live in the country with the greatest medical minds, the greatest research universities, the greatest healthcare programs, and the fact that we aren't up to speed like the rest of the world means that we should go further. I appreciate being able to serve on this committee. I hope that we are able to present a bill that we are able to help the majority of Georgia citizens, that we are able to do it safely and within the confines of the law, that we can take the good from these other states that have gone forward and present something here in Georgia that the nation will look to as the standard bearer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Gravely. Madam Chair, did you say you had a couple more things before I wrap this up?
I just meant a couple of things I left out. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Got you on.
I wanted to thank the staff again. I know I've talked to y'all individually, and I appreciate all the work you've done. And second of all, the other thing I left out was talking with the governor's office. I believe we're still in negotiations and trying to figure out numbers about the estimated cost of per child that could potentially be in a study. I know the recommended number, I think, was $7 or $8 million. And at the last committee meeting, we talked about if that was a realistic number. And I would just implore to the committee that whatever the number ends up being, that we as a group lobby together in the fiscal office and the OPB and budget hearings, that whatever number we agree upon that we're going to ask for, that, you know, it's a pretty heavy lift to be able to get that additional money, and that we work on it together.
Okay. I'll wrap us up here with a couple of comments. I want to take the opportunity to thank Senator Underman. Thank you for enjoyed sharing as co-chair with you. You clearly have a passion for especially helping children in our state. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for the charge you're leading on that. Representatives Gravely, Golick, and Kaiser, all the way down there, thank you for representing the House in a well manner. Senators Miller, and I know Mr. Burke's not here, and Thompson, thank you for your participation in this committee as well. Traveling hundreds of miles across the state, thank you to each of you for your commitment to learn more about this issue over the last few months. I also want to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Matthews Gwynn. I know he's not here, in the Medical Association of Georgia. Dr. Gwynn, he worked hard and offered a fair voice from a medical perspective, gave of his very valuable time away from his practice and his family, and Georgia's grateful for his service. And thank you, Chuck Spouse, for serving as a designee for the behalf of the prosecuting attorneys, and for what your membership does to keep our citizen state. We're grateful for that as well, too. And I also want to thank you to the staff. You've done a great job. This has been a difficult task, and we really appreciate what you've done to help make this a committee a success. For me, this journey started about a year ago when I received an email from a young mother who lived in my district, and she had a very simple request. Please help my family. After meeting this mom and her husband and their 4-year-old daughter, who was near death with life-threatening seizures, I was confronted with the question we all need to ask. What would I do if this was my child? I knew at that moment that my political focus was about to drastically change. And so since last session, many of my colleagues and I have been on a mission to accomplish 2 objectives. 1, to bring Georgia's medical refugees, like the Smiths, back home, and to reunite them with their families, churches, and support networks. And secondly, to provide a safe, legal, effective, and timely access to medical cannabis oil in our state for those who are hurting from debilitating illnesses. We've heard overwhelming support for this issue and have received great input and testimony over the last several months, input that will continue to shape legislation, such as House Bill 1 in the 2015 session. But House Bill 1 or Senate Bill 6, Senate Resolution 7, it's not just legal jargon in a document that could become maybe possibly part of Georgia law, but rather it's the chance to change and improve the quality of life for thousands of Georgians. This legislation is more than just words that appear on a paper. It's Haley and Tripp, Caden and Hunter, Victoria and Dylan, Ashley and Ansley, Jagger, Maggie, Michaela, Miranda, Amaya, Brooke, Ava, and Marlo. Children from Georgia who have been separated from their parents, family and friends, and support networks. It's Elena and Kendall and Britlin and Emily and Henry and Natasha, Billy, Cooper, Sydney, Ann Townsend, Hawk, Connor, Ava, Layla, Ryan, Ellison, Ansley, Zoe, Hudson, Mary Grace, and hundreds more. Children whose families are not able to move to another state for a multitude of reasons. Each of these children deserves safe access in Georgia. It's Katie and David and Christina, Bailey and Joshua, all adults in Georgia who have debilitating illnesses and could potentially benefit from cannabis oil. It's cancer patients who are suffering from terminal illnesses or who are in the ravages of chemotherapy to extend their life, who may find some relief from a medical cannabis program in Georgia. You know, any legislation we do, including HB 1 or any Senate bill, it's not just words. It represents these families and citizens that need a solution and hope. While any potential legislation is about our citizens, it's also about Georgia's state rights. A sovereign state should not wait and depend on other states, near or far, to find a solution for our citizens. Nor should Georgia be delayed in the process because we're waiting on our dysfunctional federal government that has so far proven itself incapable of solving this problem. It is imperative that we, as elected leaders of this state, our state, control our state's destiny to help our citizens that are hurting. We must act now. While we wait, Georgia residents are leaving our state. Families are being torn apart. Children are dying. In fact, since session ended last March 20th, three Georgia children that we know of have passed away from seizure-related illnesses. So, in honor and in memory of Abe Hopkins, Trinity Sumlin, and Mary Elizabeth Hopkins, three beautiful children who roamed the halls of this Capitol last session with their parents begging us to act. We must find a safe and legal and timely solution in Georgia. We cannot move fast enough. The members of the committee, thank you, and this committee is adjourned.